Saturday, May 40 here. So almost all of our institutions are controlled by people on the left, with the exception of some parts of the military and some parts of business, particularly small business. But the professions are overwhelmingly controlled by people on the left. Academia, education, the media, NGOs, art, culture, government bureaucracies, right, all overwhelmingly controlled by the left. And now we're seeing each day MAGA taking back some of these institutions and just crushing some institutions, such as the White House Correspondents Association. All right, it's led by this flamboyant, excitable Kamala Harris cheerleader, Eugene, flamboyant gay black guy, and he is just making blunder after blunder, and the White House is just absolutely crushing him. And he's going to become an MSNBC host, right? He's in his final days at Politico. He's really, a left-wing opinion dude. He's not much of a reporter. And he's the head of the White House Correspondents Association for affirmative action reasons. And he's completely overmatched. He's incredibly excitable. He's making terrible decisions, and the White House is just crushing him. And the only reason he's staying in his position as president of the White House Correspondents Association is that he wants to go to their big event in March and hang out with celebrities. And so it's just hilarious watching the White House crush this left-wing group. And you have Peter Baker writing in the New York Times about how the White House, by expanding the press pool, right, so the White House is keeping up conventional members of the media in the press pool, but also adding some alternative voices. This is reminiscent of Putin's Russia. And Peter Baker has a very impressive body of work. Like, I enjoyed many of his books. Loved his book on Bush Cheney. Loved his book on James Baker. But when it comes to Donald Trump, he's just absolutely deranged. And to say that the White House expanding the press pool is reminiscent of Vladimir Putin and his authoritarian rule in Russia is hilarious, and it's hysterical overstatement, which is going to rebound against the mainstream media and the left and other people who engage in this hysteria, right? A single overstatement has the power for the reader, for the listener, to completely dissuade himself of anything that somebody is saying. And you particularly saw the hysteria in the final 2 weeks of the campaign. I just finished Michael Wolff's book, All or Nothing, on Trump recapturing the presidency. Michael Wolff says that Donald Trump had his worst week of the campaign in the final week. I don't know if it's true, but I just kept laughing out loud as I was listening to the audible version of Michael Wolff's book. But I remember Trump talking about Arnold Palmer's manhood and pretending to perform oral sex on a microphone. And then the Tony Hinchcliffe joke about Puerto Rico as an island of garbage. And just the hysteria in the New York Times in particular in the final 2 weeks of the campaign was just glorious. And so Mark Halperin made the most astute comment. He says, all these institutions that the left has taken for granted, that they're now being ripped away from the control of the left, and the left doesn't know what to do. And it's hilarious, right? That it's not marked out by the will of heaven that the left is just going to always reign over all of our institutions. And now they're being ripped away. This didn't occur in the first term. Right? The left got stronger during Trump's first term. Right? Speech restriction got heavier. But I was at synagogue the other day, and someone said, now that Donald Trump's been elected, we can say retard and another slur. We can start using this language again. We can start saying inappropriate things again. And yeah, there's just an air of increased freedom, and it's just glorious to see these left-wing institutions topple, and they have absolutely no clue how to stop it. Right? They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they stand for. They don't know how to recalibrate. Right? Americans hate all these speech restrictions. They hate diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI. They hate affirmative action. And so the White House Correspondents Association is completely mismatched in its war with the White House. The AP has also been hysterical and completely mismatched in its war with the White House. So welcome. My name's Fordy, Luke Ford. I'm from Australia near Sydney, and I've lived in California since 1977. And I'm a descendant of Michael Dwyer, who was an Irish rebel who 3 times escaped from British prisons at the end of the 18th, early 19th century. And I'm a convert to Orthodox Judaism, so there you go. There's my brief introduction. So, Washington Post owner Jeff Bezos has announced that the opinion section will now be guided by pretty similar values to the Wall Street Journal opinion section. It's going to be all about freedom and civil liberties. And it's not going to publish opinion pieces in contradiction to those principles. So it's no longer going to be a dominantly left-wing opinion section. So this is another left-wing institution that is being ripped away and replaced by something else. Companies are dialing back on their DEI programs. And let's be honest, federal workers are overwhelmingly on the left. They overwhelmingly vote for the Democratic Party. And a disproportionate number of them, right, are in their jobs because of affirmative action. Right? They're not in their jobs due to merit. Right? They're in their jobs because there's some kind of ethnic or sexual identity mafia that is fighting for them. And so if you replace affirmative action workers with people who hold their jobs on merit, you should have more productivity and just more social trust and more social cohesion. So as Trump guts the federal workforce, right, he's overwhelmingly gutting the pet projects of the left, right? US aid wasn't funding right-wing programs. It was overwhelmingly funding bizarre, fetishistic, left-wing pet causes. And the people who are getting laid off are overwhelmingly on the left, Democratic Party voters. And you have more and more corporate titans aligning with Trump, right? Jeff Bezos had his initial conversation with Trump in July of last year. And they've been getting closer since then. Mark Zuckerberg is realigned to a more Trump-friendly position. Right? Big tech is substantially realigned to Donald Trump. Jamie Dimon, major banker, is aligning with Donald Trump. And so every day we're seeing MAGA go out and retake more and more territory. And the effectiveness with which they're going about this new Donald Trump term is just breathtaking. It's hilarious. It's so unexpected because even though Republicans often won elections, they never made progress because the levers of power, the institutions, almost always controlled by the left. And people get lazy when they're in power and they don't see any threat to their power, and the left overreached with more and more speech restrictions, more and more pushing for DEI. And now the backlash is enormous. So we'll be curious to see which institutions start falling away from the left, because power is, for right now, centered on MAGA, Donald Trump, the Republicans, and men in particular naturally orient upwards towards power. Right? You want to be aligned with the people who have the high ground in your particular area. And so all sorts of changes that would have seemed unfathomable 5 months ago are now ripping through America. And the Democratic Party just doesn't seem to know what to do. So if Trump shifts funding away from the left, right? If corporations, right, shift away from the left isn't even getting donations anymore, because many rich people don't want to be seen as funding the opposition to Trump. So rich, powerful people are shying away from funding the left for the first time in 60 years plus. Right? When was the last time that rich, powerful people were afraid to give money to left-wing causes? I can't recall that happening in the last 60 years. And so all sorts of left-wing NGOs are suffering. And what if Donald Trump removes tax-exempt status for university foundations, university endowments? Right? So that would be hundreds of billions of dollars that are usually set aside for overwhelmingly left-wing causes. And what if we start taxing that money? So it's glorious to see how prepared and how exact, how triumphant and how effective MAGA is. And this might just be the beginning, right? We might just start seeing more and more institutions leave the left. Doesn't mean they go MAGA, but they might just leave the left, go towards more centrist or more libertarian direction. There are many varieties of right-wing thought. So it's not that these institutions and power brokers are all going to lean in Trump's direction, but Trump has disincentivized the rich and powerful right now from opposing him. Right? He's disincentivized them from funding opposition. And if you remove the incentive to fight you, right, that's a substantial victory in and of itself. Right? So right now Trump is firing up his side, and there is growing opposition, but it doesn't appear to be coming from the rich and powerful so much. And so you need elites to get things done. And elites don't seem to have their act together right now in fighting Trump. They don't feel terribly inspired to take on Trump. And so if you can empower your supporters and diminish the morale of your opposition, that's a powerful accomplishment. Right, in his first term, Trump fired up his supporters, but he fired up his opponents even more. This time around, it seems like the opposite is happening. Trump is firing up his supporters and frequently dispiriting his opposition. Now, Trump is going to overreach. Trump is going to make mistakes. Democrats are going to capitalize. Hubris is a terrible thing, and it's also an inevitable thing. Right, we all at times have an exaggerated sense of our own prowess and our own importance. So the laws of political physics will operate. But that doesn't mean that underneath all this, there won't be a steady erosion of the left's monopoly on our institutions. People might find they really enjoy having freedom of speech. I don't know how you're here in America that long. Well, I came here in 1977, graduated high school in June of 1984. I've been in California since 1977, and I really like living in California. And you invest in a place, right? The place becomes familiar and it becomes redolent of meaning. I moved a lot as a child, and I overwhelmingly lived in the country. So now as an adult, I want to live in the big city, and I'm sick of moving. I almost moved back to Australia a few years ago, but Australia would be a return to something familiar as well. I've got a lot of investment in Australia. I've got a lot of my mates in Sydney in particular. If I lived in Australia, I'd want to live in Sydney, because there's a nice little Jewish community there, and I got lots of my mates from childhood. So corporate leaders are usually pragmatic. Like, everyone's pragmatic, right? Everybody responds to incentives, but corporate leaders usually have the fewest barriers between themselves and opportunism. Right? I think opportunism is usually a good thing. It means you take advantage of the opportunity. It's a situationist view of life, that who we are depends on the situation. And so corporate leaders trending in a more friendly direction towards Trump, right? Perhaps that's because they are the group who are the most pragmatic. And then other groups have more ideological filters on. Might take them a little longer to trend towards Trump. But even people with ideological filters are still opportunists and still have pragmatism. They just have to work through these mystifying layers of ideology before they can get there. And Rob Long, producer and writer for the TV show Cheers, he told me in an interview over 20 years ago that American presidential elections are like casting for a reality show, that America's casting for who it wants to be its lead character on the nation's reality show for the next 4 years. And so far, I think people are enjoying the ride. People are entertained. And that's good for Trump and for the cause. Right? It's not just important to do the right thing. Right? It helps if you combine the right thing with the fun thing, with the pleasurable thing, with the exciting thing, with the thing that gives you a dopamine hit. So being righteous and right is not enough. You want to incentivize people to do the righteous and right thing by giving them a dopamine hit when they do the right thing, and suffer a decrease in dopamine when they do the wrong thing. And so far, right, the Trump show is rolling on and people are getting a dopamine hit from it. It's wildly entertaining. It's wildly funny. And there was never a market for books on Joe Biden, right? Books on Joe Biden did not sell. But books on Donald Trump sell. right? Whether they're negative or positive. Okay, we're in a new America. It's morning in America. Bye-bye.